Many of you might be familiar with a subreddit called Female Dating Strategy. And I've known about this thing for quite some time. But the interesting thing about it, for starters, is if you read through a lot of it, oftentimes the things being said and the statements being made are so hyperbolic that one gets the sense, and this has turned out to be true, in some cases it's men masquerading as women. But today I want to cover an article from earlier this year which was critical of the female dating strategy. And in general, the main thrust is that although there are guidelines in this subreddit that are useful for women to follow in their dating strategy, ultimately it's too constrictive. And in fact, this is a direct quote, the guidelines can be useful for setting boundaries, but they can become oppressive to women too. And of course, every time you hear a word such as oppressive in this context, when it's not in the case of, say, Maoist China or Pol Pot's Cambodia or Stalin's Russia, you have to really take a wide berth and think maybe they're being a little bit ridiculous about this. But the major criticism of the subreddit is that they're generally too conservative. And the reason for this is because they offer certain tips, pointers, and guidelines that run in many ways counter to the current year's culture and current year's dogma. And by that is specifically meant the idea that the advice given there is reflective of sexual conservatism. This idea, for example, that's cited in the article that women should not offer their head count, no pun intended, to men. They probably shouldn't, if it's avoidable, have multiple sexual partners, etc., etc. Now, sure, there might be some men that don't mind a woman who is age 26 or 27 and has had 300 sexual partners, and for them, I guess it's fine. But for most men, it is reassuring, or at least less horrifying, when they find out that the woman has not had a tremendous number of sexual partners. This cultural, religious / biological obsession with virginity, for example, is a good indication of this. Why, for example, is the alleged mother of the alleged Christ a virgin? Because it's a hallowed position, it's special, and because culturally and biologically, that's the best you can do. A woman who's been unsullied, for lack of a better term, and is ready to be impregnated, which itself has a lot to do with worries about strain and in particular paternity assurance. Remember, a man never is 100% certain that the child is his. A woman always knows this. And so they offer a lot of pushback to this notion that women should, at the very least, not disclose their head count, the number of men they've been with. And let's be honest, in practice, most women are not dumb in this regard. They know that. They know that if they're on a couple of dates and they like the guy and they've screwed 80 men, that is going to be a major turnoff to the average guy, arguably to most men. And apparently in this article, as well as among some of the subreddit users, they are quite upset by this pointing out this simple reality, these simple set of facts, as if men didn't have their own guidelines that they generally need to follow. So, for example, if there were a men's dating strategy subreddit, which there probably is, I mean, you could argue the many, many incarnations of PUA, and they're all pretty much the same at the end of the day, and the many, many discussions about female nature. In essence, it's all about mating, reproductive, and dating strategy at the end of the day. If you're going to pursue it, then you're going to incorporate some of these things that you've learned. So, for example, don't be broke. Have a good job, whatever. These things that are sort of common sense to most men, at least, when they realize that, and this is the point here, relationships, all human relationships, are fundamentally transactional. And the relationship between a man and a woman, much more so than friendship, is transactional. These are two different pieces of a biological puzzle that are forced to come together to bring about the next generation. And in order to do that, you have to, quote unquote, make compromises. When it comes to mating strategy, the opposite sex is very, very different. There might be a lot of similarities and overlap in other ways between men and women, but not when it comes to mating and dating. And so basically people are upset that there are these limitations being imposed on women. Some of the stuff there is ridiculous, such as he needs to treat you like a queen, especially if you've been in an abusive relationship. I've read through these things on occasion. But the fundamental question here is, if male-female relationships are transactional in nature, and they most certainly are, what is it that you need to do in order to make it work? Now, myself, of course, I'm not interested in this sort of thing, but I still have acquaintances and friends who want to pursue relationships and have an interest. If you're going to buy into this sort of thing, you're going to have to take the time to study this. And it cuts both ways. Nobody can have it all. If you're a man, obviously social status and money is going to be important. And for both sexes, looks are the most important factor, without question. More important than pretty much anything else. But then, in the case of women, assuming you look decent or look good enough, and I'm going to factor in my most recent video, these days a woman can kind of look any way she wants and still be reasonably successful. Because the sexual market has been so skewed in the current year, what ought you do? Well, maybe not screwing every guy left and right, despite it being fun, is a starting point. A lot of guys, for example, don't particularly want to work their ass off at a job and acquire status, but they see it as a necessity. They might not per se be linking it to reproductive success, say instinctually, but they know somewhere in the back of their minds that it's sort of relevant, and that if they do well at their job and they make good money and they have a decent status, that will be a contributing factor. They know that being broke or poor or not a man of means is not a good way of getting a woman. And so what we have on display here at the end of the day is the typical hypocrisy that we've all come to know, not just in terms of feminists, but in general in a largely gynocentric society where men have lots of restrictions and need to follow certain guidelines, and women, even when suggestions made by and large in the majority by other women are being given to them, they rebel and don't like it because they want to have their cake and eat it too. Because fundamentally, this is what it comes down to. In a very transactional relationship of the sort that exists between human men and human women, let me ask the question, can you have your cake and eat it too? No. You're going to have to, quote unquote, make compromises, which to me just sounds like a lot of stress. I've talked about this before. But if you really want that, you're going to have to make these compromises, and it cuts both ways. Women ultimately will have to make compromises too. Though on a related note, given how skewed the sexual market is, I think women are increasingly in a position to do just that, meaning have their cake and eat it too, which I think will get worse and worse as the years pass by. But the real question here, and the real issue, is human beings' fundamental unwillingness to come to terms with their animalistic nature. That at the end of the day, we're just a bunch of complicated animals. We're not fundamentally different from rabbits. We're more complex in many ways. We exhibit different behaviors, but fundamentally our behavior is predicated on the same motivations. But in terms of the fact that we are mammals that want to reproduce, at least on average we want to reproduce, and we go about it in a certain way, these strategies don't stray tremendously far from most other species of mammals. They certainly don't stray far from other apes. We are, after all, the human ape. And this reticence and resistance to accepting a kind of human nature that is innate and can be observed and extremely mechanical at times is one of the reasons why people will continue to fail to understand these phenomena and write about it and whinge about it and just not come to terms with relatively simple facts in many cases. Anyway, please subscribe if you have not yet done so. Click the bell icon to be notified for forthcoming videos and share the video if possible. And as always, may the gods watch over you, and I will check you out later if I'm still alive. You take care and enjoy the rest of your week. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.